What's up, guys? I'm back. Let's talk about some books. Welcome to my monthly reading wrap-up. I'm so sorry it took me so long to get this out. It's mid-May, I think. Hopefully the editing process hasn't taken me longer than expected. Yeah, I would love to get these out sooner to you guys. But it's just been a crazy month. I did some traveling earlier this month. We've been doing lots of gardening, lots of time outside, lots of reading, So that's the goal. There's my pup. Yeah, so let's just get into some books. Let's talk about everything I've been reading. I've read very widely this month, which is honestly the way I want to be reading. Again, with these videos, I'm talking about a bunch of books and I'm not spoiling them. The idea is that I'm giving you sort of like trailer-like content to tell you, about the books. So, first book that I read in April, I started actually right at the end of March, is Circe by Madeline Miller. I don't have the dust jacket for this one anymore. We lost it a while ago. My wife read this one before me and has been singing the praises of it for a long time, so I've been meaning to get to it. Yeah, this book is really incredible. So basically it is taking a side character from Greek mythology, from Homer's Odyssey, and building a whole narrative out from the little bit of information we have about her, Circe being that character. Circe is a witch. She is an immortal nymph, and she comes in contact with this strange power of magic from the earth itself. And I don't want to tell you too much more about the plot there, but I'll say that I really loved the themes explored in this book. One of my favorite things that I found is explored quite often in fantasy, a couple times with Neil Gaiman, is this idea of characters that live for an incredibly long time. Perhaps they're immortal, and their interactions with mortals and the ways that they sort of conceptualize the mortal life is really, I think, really fertile ground to make commentary on the human experience. And Madeline Miller does that to great effect here. Madeline Miller's prose is just gorgeous. It took me a little while to get used to how flowery it was. Her scene descriptions, the inner dialogue of Circe is very poetic and metaphorical, but ultimately once I settled into that, I found that it was kind of impacting the way that this might sound dramatic, but it really started to impact the way I saw the world. Looking out at nature, these sort of like metaphorical, poetic phrases coming to mind, and I think that that's sort of, when we think about you are what you read, it's amazing how reading a book can kind of impact the way you think about things. I think that the strength of this book is its character work. Circe is a complex character. She goes through whole arcs of believing something and then coming to see that as a lie, of believing things about herself and coming to see those as sort of malfunctions of her personality, neuroses that she comes back around on, but it's all within this framework of 1,000 years, or I think over 1,000 years by time the story concludes. And I just love that. I love when you have a character that lives eons but still deals with many of the same things that we deal with in our short mortal lives. Again, I think that's fertile ground to make commentary on the human experience. So really enjoyed Circe, way more than I thought I would, and I'm looking forward to getting further into Madeline Miller's catalog there. So this next book, this is one of those books that I have trouble talking about because I love it so much, but I also really have been super excited to talk to you guys about it. It is American Gods by Neil Gaiman. This story is incredible. It's a road trip. It is a thriller. It has murder mystery. Gosh, it has it all, honestly. It's almost like a portal fantasy, but still set within our world. So if you don't know what a portal fantasy is, I'm sure many of you guys do. It's a story where you have a character who's ignorant to, think of Alice in Wonderland. character that's ignorant to another world, and it is transported into that world and becomes our viewpoint character through which we experience this new magical, fantastical world. What's amazing about this book is it's the world we know. It's the America we know, like full of all the dark imperfections. Gaiman has a way of weaving in American history, commentary on our culture. There's just so much packed into this book. But on top of that, riding on top and underneath it is this mythical, wacky, dark fantasy story. And I just loved it. I loved reading Norse mythology before this one. Without saying too much about the plot, I think it added a cool precursor to my experience there. There are certain characters that appear in this book that harken back to Norse mythology. I think I can say that much safely. And it's just, I think that there are certain plot points in this book towards the end that hit way harder for me than they would have if I didn't know so much about some of the Norse myths. American Gods is written beautifully. I've said this before, but Neil Gaiman is a master of pacing. I want to do a full review of this. I had an idea of picking my favorite moment from every chapter. We'll see if I go that ambitious with the review, but I think that would be a fun way. Since much of my audience has read this book, it might be a fun way for us to kind of like delve deep into this. When I finished this book, I turned to my wife and I said, "This is my favorite novel I've ever read." And it's got to be up in the top 3, but I read some other great novels this month. So let's keep talking about those. The next book I read this month was the second in a series, The Subtle Knife by Philip Pullman. So as you guys know, in March, I read The Golden Compass. Absolutely loved it. This series is written for kids, young adults, but it's got some really dense philosophical themes going on, some really dark sci-fi elements, and this book went crazy. I mean, what Philip Pullman is playing with here, I don't want to spoil because this is the second book in the series, but what he's playing with here is taking theology and science and whirling them together with fantasy to create something that feels like a genre of its own. I didn't enjoy this book as much as The Golden Compass. Lyra is a character, the protagonist of The Golden Compass, is very near and dear to my heart, and I felt like this book kind of shifted the focus away from her, so I'm hoping that the third book returns to Lyra in a more major way. But I did like some of the new points of view in this book, some returning characters from the first book, and he was able to explore other parts of the world, other elements of the kind of like conflict, the war that's going on in these books, from these new points of view that I thought actually really enhanced the story. So I'm really excited to get into the third one. I've heard it's very strange, but I loved the more strange psychedelic elements of this book. So, I'm along for the ride. Really interested to see how he sticks the landing on some of the commentary he's making on theology there. And when we're done with the series, we will absolutely do a full spoiler trilogy review. My wife and I have been reading this together, so maybe she'll come on and join me for that discussion. We shall see. Next book is The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu. I think I pronounced that correctly. Cixin Liu. It's translated by Ken Liu, who I think wrote The Dandelion Dynasty, which is a fantasy series that I absolutely want to get into. The Three-Body Problem is the first in a series. I think it's a trilogy with maybe a side novel. You guys might have to correct me on that, but this book is a hard sci-fi book. This genre pulls from real-world science, real-world physics, very much grounded in our reality, to kind of speculate and weave its wild sci-fi story. And it is wild, so just because it's pulling from, that's something that, like, going into this book, I was a little unsure. I love fantastical, I was just talking about how much I love the weirdness of Subtle Knife and American Gods. So, sci-fi hasn't really, it's taken me so long to check it out because, when I think about something grounded, that doesn't excite me as much. But something that this totally just blew the lid off of my expectations there was that this kind of sci-fi can be weird and it can be fantastical, and what's so kind of satisfying about this genre is that it does that like within the confines, loosely speaking, of science. This book was an intellectual read for me. It had me Googling not just physics and theories around extraterrestrials, but actually Chinese history. So this was written by a Chinese author, and I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't really know anything at all about the Chinese Cultural Revolution, and the book opens with that environment of China. Really, really fascinating to kind of dive into completely different minds, completely different perspective on the world, and to hear commentary about America, to hear commentary about the world from that perspective was really, really fascinating. On top of that, just an amazing science fiction story here. There are scenes where protons are unfolded and theories of microcosms are explored. I mean, just crazy stuff. Again, I'll do a review of this series when I'm done with it, and I'm absolutely going to finish this series because, I loved reading it. I actually have a quote here that really captures something deeper that I experienced with this book, which was considering the vastness of the universe. And that's really something that I'm going to get into with my next book, but something I love about fiction and reading nonfiction alongside it. Sometimes they line up in a way that just creates this sort of like combo, this reading diet that impacts real life in a profound way. I mean, maybe I sound pretentious. I don't mean to sound pretentious, but that's what happened for me reading this book. So there's this character Wong who is having a wild experience, pondering the idea of life elsewhere and what that could mean for Earth. Again, not a spoiler, but just really, really cool. As Wong got up to leave, he was held back by a snippet of hymnal music, so he was actually sitting outside of a cathedral, considering all of this. It wasn't Sunday, so it was likely a choir rehearsal. The song was "Come Gracious Spirit, Heavenly Dove." As he listened to the solemn, sacred music, Wong once again felt that the universe had shrunk until it was the size of an empty church. The domed ceiling was hidden by the flashing red light of background radiation, and he was an ant crawling along the cracks in the floor. He felt a giant invisible hand caressing his trembling heart, and he was once again a helpless babe. Something deep in his mind that had once held up softened like wax and collapsed. He covered his eyes and began to cry. So in this book, you have characters who are having existential crisis in the face of what's happening in the story. And since it's grounded in our world, it's grounded in real-world science. This book has a way of kind of immersing you in the scientific process as they are considering the possibilities, within the narrative. And so it really, it puts you right there with them in the midst of their existential crises. So that was really cool. And again, it kind of it conveyed in my own experience this feeling of being small within a vast universe, which is a terrifying, but also, for me personally, kind of a beautiful feeling, considering the vast mystery that we're all kind of swept up into. Which brings me to my next book. This is a book I've been reading for a long time, and because it's quite a dense read, and I've been meaning to finish it up. So when I was reading this book, I decided to pick this up as kind of my side read and wrap it up. It's called Losing Ourselves by Professor Jay Garfield. Jay Garfield is a professor of philosophy, logic, and Buddhist studies at Smith College, and he's also taught at Harvard and Melbourne College. So he's really an accomplished scholar in the realm of philosophy. I heard him on a podcast recently and picked up his book. I say recently, back in the winter, I picked up his book, and it's taken me a few months to get through this one because it's quite dense. If you're interested in concepts of, the Buddhist concepts of selflessness, anatta, then this is a really great read because Jay Garfield takes the approach of Western philosophy and cognitive neuroscience to sort of break down these quite highfalutin philosophical concepts that come by way of Indian and East Asian Buddhism. He's using texts from Hume alongside quotes from Zen Buddhism and Tibetan tradition to really explore this concept of really the fact that we're all sort of part of this vast universe, and that a shift of identification from this kind of small self to being a part of a larger world, a larger universe, can be quite freeing and actually stir feelings of compassion, interconnectedness with the wider universe. So I've just outed myself as a lover of these sort of what some people consider to be woohoo concepts, but what I love so much about Jay Garfield is that this is presented in such a grounded way, such an optimistic way. Again, these concepts can be terrifying to people, but there's a way of engaging with it that is actually the opposite. It's quite empowering and quite beautiful. So reading these two books alongside each other was just the perfect cocktail, but quite heady, quite heavy. You know, by the end of that week, I told my wife I felt like my head was just like, there was pressure. It was like so much thought. And so I was really looking forward to getting into something breezier, lighter. And I read this one in 2 days. I finally got into ACOTAR. That's right, A Court of Thorns and Roses. I devoured it in 2 days. This is, if you don't know, I'm sure you guys all know, this is the first in a series of romantasy books. So romantasy, subgenre of fantasy, that's all about that romance, all about those heartthrobs and those spicy moments. I'm trying to read widely, so I wanted to check this out. I've heard good things about the series. I was not impressed with the first book, but I think that part of it was just sort of like settling into the experience and realizing, oh, this is definitely not written for me. I mean, I knew that going into it, but really sort of coming to grips with that. And, you know, so it did not feel unlike sitting down and binging a season of The Bachelor with my wife, which I've done and had a great time. And like I said, I read this in like 2 days, maybe 3. And part of that was the desire to find out what happens, and part of it was just to check it off because you know, I didn't love it. I'm gonna check out the second book because I've heard that's where some of the fantasy elements start to come in. That's one part of this book that I found just a little disappointing, was while the romance part of it delivered, there wasn't really much going on beneath the surface there from a fantasy perspective. It definitely set up some stuff, so I'm interested to see how it delivers on that later on. So we'll get to that at some point, but I'm not like, you know, on the edge of my seat for the next installment. Okay, final book. This is actually perfect because it is my book of the month. And one of my favorite books I've ever read. So I feel very lucky that I got 2 books like this in the same month, American Gods and this next one, All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy. This is, again, the first in a trilogy. I'm opening up way too many series here. But this one, I saw Tom Orange's review of this one on his channel, and he called it one of his new favorites. And after he described the story, I just decided I had to jump on it, moved it to the top of my TBR, and I'm so glad I did. This is my first Cormac McCarthy book. It's a modern Western, I'll say. I think I can say that it's a modern Western. It's about 2 young men in the dying days of the cowboy that decide to jump on their horses and ride south to Mexico. What's amazing about this book is it hits all the notes of a Western that you'd want, you know? I'm not even going to list those off because I think that would be spoilers. But, you know, when you think about reading a Western and what that genre is known for, certain things come to mind, and this delivers on it. But to me, it delivered on it in a way that didn't feel cliche or cheap. The story just naturally led from one cowboy adventure to the next. And not just adventures and thrills, but the quiet, beautiful moments that you might imagine, you know, a horse wrangler on a farm to experience. You know, a couple of boys out on the frontier by the campfire underneath the stars. There's so many beautiful moments. As someone who loves sleeping under the stars myself, I found myself moved in a nostalgic kind of way by the way that Cormac McCarthy describes being out in nature. beside a fire with your friend. I'll just read you a quick quote so you can get a sense of the prose here. But what Cormac McCarthy does that I think is really amazing is he uses metaphor, he uses words mashed together in a way that I would never expect. It's like this kind of linguistic alchemy that he accomplishes here. And it's highly effective for me in conveying these atmospheric scenes. You get these characters and they're riding and there's a storm approaching. By early evening, all the sky to the north had darkened and the spare terrain they trod had turned a neuter gray as far as the eye could see. They grouped in the road at the top of a rise and looked back. The storm front towered above them and the wind was cool on their faces. They slumped bleary-eyed in their saddles and looked at one another. Shrouded in black thunderheads, the distant lightning glowed mutely like welding seen through foundry smoke, as if repairs were underway at some flawed place in the dark iron of the world. Just the dark iron of the world, so beautiful. There's another phrase that I'll never forget where John Grady is wrangling a colt, and it says that the hot breath wells up from its dark nostrils like news from another world. It's like the idea of a horse's breath being the news from another world. It's such a strange phrase, but to me, I get what he means there. It's this animalistic alienness of being so close to another creature that's so different. Anyways, it was really just beautiful prose. The story, again, touches on so many of the things that you'd expect from a Western. It even has a little bit of romance, which I found just really beautiful, the way it was written. Like I said, Tom Orange recommended this one, and I don't know if it was just him making the video and talking about it, but John Grady in my mind just looks like Tom Orange. So, Tom Orange, you are John Grady to me, my friend. I hope that's all right. If you want to know what John Grady looks like, folks, go watch some Tom Orange. I'm absolutely going to be reading the next books in this trilogy. It's just a beautiful, beautiful book. One of my favorite I've ever read. So I feel very lucky to have so many incredible reads in the same month. We got through several books. I've been reading a little bit slower this month, so I guess I could talk to you about what I've been reading so far in May. Like I said, I did some traveling earlier in the month, did some camping, and decided to take a little bit of a break from reading during that time. But I've got some really great reads going right now. The first is Aldous Huxley's Perennial Philosophy. About a little over halfway done with this one, and it's been an amazing book. It's a book that came out in 1944. Really feels ahead of its time in its exploration of various Eastern philosophies, and it's really exposed me to some mystic Christian traditions and thought that I had really never heard of. So every other page I'm tabbing because it's got so many beautiful quotes. So this feels like a branching book for me. I'm going to have a lot of different philosophers and mystical thinkers to dig into after finishing this one. I'm also reading Dan Dennett's Kinds of Minds. It's kind of crazy. The day after I started reading this one, I found out Daniel Dennett passed away that day. So it feels right to be reading one of his books now as we remember him and think about the contribution he made to philosophy, to modern philosophy, and to the modern atheist movement. This book is all about consciousness as theorized in other minds. So thinking about what is the experience of minds other than ours, and what can we know, what can't we know. So it's digging into sort of the difference between ontology and epistemology, and I think that later in the book he gets really into language and AI and conscious machines, which is something that interests me. So I'm really excited to get into that part of this book. And again, just feels right to be reading one of his books now as we're remembering his life, celebrating his life. I finally got a library card because I'm buying too many books. And I picked up Mary Oliver's collection of poems. It's called 1,000 Mornings. And I'm loving this so much. Just every day, kind of in between tasks for work or in the morning, I'm just picking it up and reading a couple poems. And maybe during the next video, I'll share my favorite from this book. But working my way through that collection, and then reading more Gaiman. Reading Neverwhere right now. this has been a really fun book, and in the midst of all these kind of dense reads, I'm glad that I have a magical, fun, hilarious. This book is really funny. There's been several moments where my wife has heard me laughing from the other room because it just cracks me up the way that Gaiman uses his kind of pithy prose to it's witty. It's a really cool world. It's imagining it's another Portal fantasy. You got a character who's thrust into this fantastical world, and it's a dark underworld beneath London. What else am I going to read this month? I'd love to finish up his Dark Materials. I've got a Jenny Wirtz book on my shelf, Master of White Storm, so I'd love to get into that. I'm kind of itching to get into the next Three Body Problem book. I think the next book is called Dark Forest. Yeah, I'm kind of feeling the call back to Roshar. Kaladin and Adolin and Shallan, they're calling my name. So I'm thinking that I might crack into that one. I think what I'll do is I'll read a couple more books over the coming weeks, and then towards the end of May, I'll get into that book. So many great reads. I'm loving all of these genres that I'm exploring. Something I'd like to sprinkle in soon is some horror. So if you got a spooky book, somebody scare me. Dang it. Somebody really just give me the willies. That would be great. I've got some kind of inspirational books to read, some more philosophy reads that I'm looking forward to get into. And I think, like I said, Aldous Huxley's book is really going to kind of open my world to a whole lot of new material to dig into. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm really thankful for everybody who's stuck around for these videos, and we'll do an American Gods proper analysis here pretty soon. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys are all doing well. Tell me in the comments what you're reading. I want to know what you guys are getting into right now, and let's chat in the comments. Thanks for sticking around. Big love. Be well. Bye.